There was a summer once, you might have been 7 or 10 or somewhere in that hazy stretch of childhood that felt like it lasted forever. School let out, and the days ahead seemed to stretch out like a highway with no visible end. You built forts. You got bored on a Tuesday afternoon in a way that felt like its own small eternity. That one summer, on its own, seems to occupy more space in your memory than entire years do now. And that's the strange part. Because last year, an entire year, 365 days of it, feels like it barely happened. It's a blur. You blinked, and it was gone. Somewhere between that endless childhood summer and this vanishing adult year, something changed. Not the clock. The clock has never sped up. A second today takes exactly as long as a second did when you were 8 years old, ticking away with the same stubborn, mechanical precision it always has. So if the clock hasn't changed, what has? That's the real mystery here. Not why time is moving faster, because it isn't, but why your experience of it has fundamentally transformed. And the answer, once you understand it, will change the way you think about every single day you have left. Let's start with the explanation you've probably already heard, the one that feels obvious enough that most people never question it. You're busier now. Adults have jobs, responsibilities, mortgages, deadlines. Kids just play. Of course, time feels different. Except that explanation falls apart almost immediately once you look at the actual pattern. Retired people, who by definition are no longer swamped with the demands of a career, report the exact same acceleration of time as working adults do. People who are unemployed, people who describe their lives as slow, unstructured, even boring, still describe their years as flying by faster than they used to. If busyness were the actual cause, these groups should be exempt. They aren't. Being busy might be a symptom of something, but it is not the disease. So we have to go deeper. And to go deeper, we need to confront an uncomfortable fact about the organs sitting inside your skull right now. It does not contain a clock. Not a literal one, anyway. There is no internal stopwatch ticking away, no calendar counting the days. Your brain never evolved the ability to directly measure objective time, because for almost the entire span of human evolution, there was no survival advantage in knowing exactly how many minutes had passed. What mattered was something else entirely, and understanding what that something else is unlocks the whole mystery. Here's the first clue. There are actually two completely different systems at work when you experience time, and they very often disagree with each other. One system operates in the present moment. This is how long something feels while it's happening. The other system operates in hindsight. This is how long something feels once you look back on it afterward. A boring meeting can feel like it drags on forever while you're sitting in it, and yet, a week later, you can barely remember it happened at all. Those are two different judgments, produced by two different mechanisms, and the second one, the retrospective one, is the one that quietly controls how your entire life feels in review. So how does that retrospective system actually work if there's no internal clock counting the seconds? This is where the real answer begins. Your brain, lacking any literal timekeeping device, uses a substitute. It uses memory. Here's the mechanism. When you look back on a stretch of time, a weekend, a month, a decade, your brain doesn't consult a stopwatch. It counts memories. It estimates duration by tallying up how many distinct, separate memories were formed during that period. A period packed with unique memories gets stamped, retroactively, as long. A period that produced almost no new memories gets compressed down to something that barely registers, even if, on a clock, both periods took exactly the same number of hours. Think of it almost like archival footage. Some months in your life get filmed in extraordinary detail, thousands of individual frames, distinct scenes, memorable moments you could replay one by one. Other months get recorded as a single blurry photograph, or worse, nothing at all. When your brain later tries to reconstruct how long something took, it's essentially counting the frames. More frames, longer felt duration. Fewer frames, and that stretch of your life gets folded down into almost nothing, even though every single day of it contained the same 24 hours as every other day you've ever lived. This raises an obvious question. What determines whether your brain records a lot of frames or almost none? The answer is novelty. New, unfamiliar, unpredictable experiences force your brain to build the memory in rich detail because it can't rely on an existing template. It has to actually encode what's happening. Repetition does the opposite. When your brain has already seen something before, the same commute, the same desk, the same conversation, it doesn't bother laying down a fresh, detailed memory. It compresses the experience, sometimes merging it with dozens of nearly identical experiences that came before it, until an entire month of near-identical Tuesdays becomes indistinguishable from a single Tuesday in your memory. There's a well-known demonstration of this called the oddball effect, studied extensively by the neuroscientist David Eagleman. In these experiments, subjects are shown a rapid sequence of repeating images, with one unexpected, unfamiliar image inserted somewhere in the middle. Afterward, when asked to estimate how long each image appeared on screen, people consistently overestimate the duration of the oddball image compared to the repeated ones, even though every image, oddball included, was shown for the exact same length of time. The unfamiliar image simply demanded more processing, more attention, more encoding, and that extra encoding gets misread later as extra duration. Eagleman took this even further with an experiment involving actual free fall. He had volunteers wear a device on their wrist and drop backward off a platform into a safety net, a genuinely frightening fall lasting about 3 seconds. Afterward, participants consistently reported that the fall had felt longer than 3 seconds, sometimes dramatically longer. But here's the crucial detail. When Eagleman tested whether people could actually perceive events faster during the fall, using a flickering display on the wrist device, they showed no improvement in real-time perception whatsoever. They weren't seeing the world in slow motion while falling. What was actually happening is that fear was flooding the brain with adrenaline, and that flood of adrenaline was driving an unusually dense, high-resolution memory of those 3 seconds. The fall didn't slow down. The memory of the fall simply got recorded in far more detail than an ordinary 3 seconds ever would. And when that memory was later replayed, all that extra detail was misread as extra time. This same mechanism explains something almost everyone has experienced without ever understanding why. The strange paradox of a vacation. While you're actually on the trip, especially somewhere new, time can feel like it's racing past. The days blur together in a rush of new sights and unfamiliar streets, and suddenly it's the last night already. But then you get home, and a week later, that same trip feels like it lasted far longer than the week it actually took. Ask yourself how far away the first day of the trip feels compared to a regular week at home from the same period, and the trip almost always wins. This is sometimes called the holiday paradox, a term popularized by the broadcaster and author Claudia Hammond, and it makes perfect sense once you separate those two systems we talked about earlier. In the moment, prospectively, novelty can actually make time feel like it's slipping away quickly, because there's so much new information to absorb. But retrospectively, once your brain tallies up the sheer density of new memories that trip produced, it stamps that week as unusually long. Two completely different judgments, from two completely different mechanisms, both technically correct in their own way. Now hold that idea in your head, because it's about to explain something much bigger than vacations. It's about to explain your entire childhood. If novelty is the raw material of long-feeling time, then childhood is the richest deposit of it that you will ever encounter. Think about how much of what happens to a young child is, quite literally, happening for the first time. First best friend. First day of school. First time riding a bike without someone holding the seat. First heartbreak. First fear of the dark. First vacation. First real failure. First real achievement. An adult's ordinary Tuesday might contain 0 new experiences. A child's ordinary Tuesday might contain a dozen. Nearly everything is unmapped territory, and your brain, quite sensibly, treats unmapped territory as important enough to record in extraordinary detail, because for a developing organism trying to build a working model of the world, almost anything might turn out to matter for survival later. This connects to something neuroscientists call neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to physically reshape itself in response to experience. That capacity is dramatically higher in childhood than at any later point in life. A young brain is, quite literally, still under construction, constantly wiring and rewiring itself as it builds its first working models of language, physics, social relationships, danger, safety, cause and effect. Nearly every experience contributes new information to that construction project, so nearly every experience gets stored. An adult brain, by contrast, has mostly finished that initial construction. It's no longer building models from scratch nearly as often. It's mostly running the models it already has. When you already know how a commute works, how a meeting unfolds, how a grocery store is laid out, your brain increasingly relies on prediction instead of fresh encoding. It fills in the blanks using what it already knows, rather than carefully recording what's actually happening. Because from a survival standpoint, that's a far more efficient use of limited biological resources. This efficiency has a name, more or less, even if your brain never calls it that internally: compression. Much like a video file that removes redundant, repeated information in order to save space, your brain quietly discards the redundant, repeated information in your daily life. It already knows what your kitchen looks like at 7 in the morning. It already knows the route to work, the rhythm of a familiar meeting, the shape of a routine phone call. None of that requires a fresh, richly detailed memory, so none of it gets one. Instead, weeks of near-identical experience collapse down into something closer to a single compressed file. And that compressed file, however many days it actually spans, later feels like almost nothing at all. This is why routine, more than almost anything else, has become one of the quiet, hidden drivers of accelerating time. It's important to say clearly that routine itself is not some kind of failure or flaw. It's simply, from your brain's point of view, extremely compressible. A life built around a stable job, a familiar home, a predictable schedule isn't a bad life. But it is, mechanically, a life that produces fewer distinct memories per year, and fewer distinct memories per year is exactly what makes years collapse together in hindsight, turning what should be 12 full months into something that feels like it barely happened at all. You've probably felt this without naming it. Scroll back through old photos on your phone, and some years produce hundreds of images spread across dozens of distinct days and places, while other years produce a thin, repetitive handful, the same rooms, the same faces, the same handful of occasions repeated with almost no variation. Ask yourself, honestly, which of those years feels longer when you look back? It's almost never the one with more days in it. It's the one with more footage. But memory density isn't the only force at work here. There's a second, entirely independent mechanism running in parallel, and it comes from a 19th century French philosopher named Paul Janet. Janet proposed something that, once you hear it, feels almost mathematically obvious. We judge the length of a period of time relative to the total amount of time we've already lived. For a 5-year-old, 1 year represents 20% of their entire life. It's an enormous, sprawling fraction of everything they've ever known. For a 50-year-old, that same single year represents only 2% of their life. It's a sliver. The actual number of days hasn't changed. A year is still a year, 365 days no matter who's counting them. But its proportional weight against your accumulating life keeps shrinking every single year, a little more each time, forever. What makes this so powerful is that it operates completely independently from the memory density mechanism we just spent all that time unpacking. One mechanism is about how much of a given year actually gets recorded into memory in the first place. The other is about how large that year appears relative to the ever-expanding scale of your total life experience. They aren't competing explanations, fighting to be the one true answer. They're two separate forces, running simultaneously, both pulling in exactly the same direction, both making each successive year feel smaller than the one before it. There's a third idea worth mentioning here, though it deserves far more caution than the previous two, because the science behind it is nowhere near as settled. Some researchers, including the timing researcher Warren Meck at Duke University, have proposed that gradual, age-related changes in dopamine and in the brain's internal timing circuits might subtly alter how we perceive the passage of individual seconds. This internal clock hypothesis is an intriguing area of ongoing research, but it remains just that, ongoing, contested, unresolved. Unlike memory density and Janet's proportional theory, which are both backed by decades of consistent experimental evidence, the internal clock idea is still very much a working hypothesis, one piece of a larger puzzle rather than an established pillar of it. What is well established is the role emotional intensity plays in all of this. Traumatic events, frightening emergencies, life-altering moments. The kind of experiences you'd give almost anything to unlive often get remembered as having lasted far longer than they actually did. This isn't your imagination playing tricks on you. It's the exact same mechanism from Eagleman's freefall experiment, operating at a larger scale. Intense emotion sharpens attention and dramatically increases the density of memory encoding, and dense encoding, replayed later, gets misread as extended duration. Objective time never slows down for anyone, in any circumstance. But the record your brain keeps of those minutes can end up so richly detailed that, in hindsight, they feel like they stretched on forever. Put all of this together, and something remarkable comes into focus. Two people can live through the exact same calendar year, the same 365 days, the same number of sunrises, and walk away with dramatically different amounts of remembered life. One person spends the year in a new city, learning a new language, meeting new people, navigating unfamiliar streets. The other spends it inside the same routine they've run for a decade. Both years contain identical objective time, but only one of them will be remembered, later, as having actually happened in full. This is really the heart of it. Your life isn't ultimately stored as a sequence of calendar days, ticking off one after another in uniform, identical units. It's stored as a sequence of experiences, a string of distinct, retrievable memories, unevenly distributed across your years, dense in some places, and almost empty in others. In a very real sense, your subjective life isn't measured in days at all. It's measured in memory. And this explains something troubling about the shape of modern life. Repetitive work schedules, identical routines, day after day. Automation quietly removing the small frictions and improvisations that used to force your brain to actually pay attention. Familiar entertainment, tuned to give you more of exactly what you already like. Habitual scrolling, the same gesture, the same feed, the same 15 minutes lost to something you won't remember by dinner. None of these things are villains in some simple story. They're just, mechanically, extremely repetitive, and repetition, as you now understand, is precisely the raw material your brain compresses down to almost nothing. Which means the antidote isn't complicated, even if it isn't easy. Learning a new skill, traveling somewhere unfamiliar, meeting people outside your usual circle, deliberately altering a routine you've run on autopilot for years, trying a hobby you have no experience with at all. None of this is motivational advice, some vague suggestion to live more fully for its own sake. It's a direct, mechanical consequence of how your memory system works. Novelty forces your brain to encode fresh, detailed memories. Detailed memories are the actual currency your brain uses to construct the felt length of your life. More novel experience means more currency, and more currency means more remembered life, not metaphorically, but literally, in terms of how dense and how long that stretch of time will feel when you look back on it years from now. So go back to that question you started with. Why did childhood summers feel endless, while entire adult years now seem to vanish without a trace? It was never about the clock. The clock has been keeping perfect, unbroken time this entire while, indifferent to all of it. What actually changed is you, or more precisely, what changed is how much of your life your brain has been choosing to preserve. Childhood recorded almost everything, because almost everything was new. Adulthood, running on routine and prediction, has been quietly discarding most of what happens, keeping only the rare moments that broke the pattern. Time was never moving faster. You were simply remembering less of it. And that reframes everything, because it means the years ahead of you aren't fixed in length the way they feel. They're not sealed off, doomed to shrink the same way the last 10 did. The amount of life you get to keep isn't set by the calendar at all. It's set by how much of it you actually choose to notice, to learn, to encounter for the very first time. Years don't disappear because time moves faster. They disappear, quietly, because too few of their moments ever became memories worth keeping.